Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 9th in a series of webinars called Freshly Certified. I know it's been a hot minute, and I'm glad to see everybody back, and I'm really excited for this great group of designers that we have today. My name is Amanda Bolte. I am the Director of Creative and Brands at Motif Labs. I'm a serial freelancer, a mentor designer. I am most importantly a certified RGD. I currently serve as the Vice Chair of the Certification Committee, who is in charge of, making sure that the certification process is accessible for all, and we constantly strive toward that goal. I sit on the board of directors for the RGD. I have also served in the past as a certification presentation reviewer, so one of those many faces that you see as you go through the certification process. If you have any questions for our presenters today, please use the chat in the control panel, and we will hold all of our questions till the end so the panelists are able to present. But if you have any questions at any point in time, just write them down, and I will moderate those as we get to questions at the end of the webinar. So today's webinar is discussing the RGD certification experience, but mainly focused around case study development and presentation. Our panel of recently certified or freshly certified RGDs will break down their case studies, why they chose it, and the process of putting it together, gathering the assets, results, and how they chose to present it to the reviewers. But first, for those who are interested in the RGD, because we may have some uncertified RGD or uncertified designers or certified designers, everybody is welcome at this. But to get a little bit to know about what RGD and those who are interested in the organization and the overall certification process. So let me just do a general introduction. RGD members are a community of over 4,000 like-minded professionals, including owners, freelancers, managers, educators, and students, with access to professional development, resources, and a vibrant exchange of information. Through RGD, Canadian designers exchange ideas, educate and inspire, set professional standards, and build a strong and supportive community dedicated to advocating to the value of design. If you want any more information about RGD or the resources available for our members or the larger design community events, kind of like this one or more, please visit the brand new designed website at rgd.ca. Shout out to Hillary on that one because it's a lot of work. Today, we're going to talk about certification. So becoming an RGD is broken down into 4 steps. Filling out the application form to see if you are eligible. Pretty simple. Taking an online test, a virtual online portfolio review, and the presentations of the results from the RGD. If you want to know more information about these steps, Heidi Very is holding a virtual information session actually on Monday at 2 o'clock. It's free to join, and you can ask all the questions that you might have. She'll take the certification process in great detail, and you can ask all your questions. But today, anyways, our focus today is about the fun part, in my opinion, is the virtual online portfolio review. And that's where the designers get to be designers. You get to nerd out, you get to talk about your work and why you did it. Portfolios are presented virtually over 30 minutes to 3 senior design practitioners serving as RGD reviewers, like I have. Candidates present the same 6 pieces submitted as part of the RGD certification application. So that form that you fill out at the very beginning is the same 6 pieces that you'll be talking about. During the review, you are to speak about all these case studies within the 30 minutes while going on into depth on one of the 6 pieces. So you can really talk in detail about one of your focal pieces. If you want to learn more about the details and certification, yes, I think I'm just repeating myself. I have doubles in my notes. I apologize. If you want more information on this. The webinar is with Heidi on Monday, and I know that she has recorded information on that as well. And our new website kind of goes into details. So with further ado, I'm going to pass it off to our very first presenter today. He's going to be talking about his presentation. Jared Labelle, RGD. Jared is a multidisciplinary brand designer from Ottawa. For close to 10 years, he's helped passionate organizations of all sizes look and act their best. He was one half of the Ottawa-based design studio Salt, has freelanced and contracted with, sorry, with, the window popped up. I apologize, guys. He has a freelancing contract with a variety of agencies and studios, led a global brand team as a fast-growing software company, and most recently started a design practice called Only Child Design Supply. Jared, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So yeah, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I recently went through my certification maybe about 2 months ago. So I'm gonna basically just walk through one of my projects and sort of give you the lowdown on sort of how I approach things. That being said, just a few tips is not to be nervous, do your best and kind of be authentic and kind of put your work together in the same way that you would present to clients or team members, colleagues, things like that. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and then we can dive right into my presentation here. All right. So for myself, I feel it important to stylize or present presentations in a design manner because as a graphic designer, I think that the way that you present your work is almost equally as important as sort of like the project itself. So I have templates and stuff that I use for my freelance projects and stuff. So I basically leverage that so I could, include some details like my email, contact information, the dates and stuff like that. That way, if anybody wants to come back to it too, there's more contextual information that sort of like helps provide some more context and details on your presentation. So I started my presentation with sort of a cover page. I sort of thanked everybody for joining me and sort of taking the time to review my work and help me along the process. And then I dove right into my first project, which is the one that I'm actually going to showcase today. So there's a few considerations that I wanted to present this project for. One of them being that it was an extensive project for a reputable organization. So obviously work that you present that has a real world, I guess, impact, I suppose, as a good word to say, that I think that's more beneficial to show just because you can show the success of it and the longevity of it and things like that. So, so this is a brand that's still in action right now, and it's a local college here in Ottawa. So I was a teacher there as well, and my old team got to work on the brand refresh. So this cover page essentially was sort of like the brief and the outcomes. So I basically started each project with a little bit of this context. So that way, once I moved into the project, questions and context and stuff was already sort of addressed. And then that way, any questions at the end were a little bit more efficient or more focused on specifics of the project. So in this case, I basically just included, like an introduction. So Algonquin College approached me and my partner, my co-founded studio Salt. They were interested in hiring us as recent grads to design a report with carte blanche. And the hopes was that we would essentially get to take on their brand standards. So as a little bit of context, I essentially started Salt right out of not high school, but college. And my life partner at the time, we both went to school together. We both decided we want to start a company together. So we decided to do that. So the report was kind of like Algonquin saying, hey, we really respect that you're recent grads and we want to shed a light on your success. So we did the report first and that ended up landing us with the brand standards. So the brief was essentially that they were growing out of the sort of like smaller community college persona and wanted to move forward into sort of like a more elevated institution. So that was kind of the approach. They wanted to retain their logo and a lot of their colors, some of the brand application. But the rest of that, the brand around that, we were able to sort of make some suggestions and refinements and things like that. So I listed some objectives. I listed the solutions that we sort of implemented or some of the high level solutions. So some of the more impactful things that me and my partner at the studio sort of presented. And then the outcome was basically just like a timeless brand that's still in use today and hopefully would continue to be in use for years to come. So it's also important when you work on a team project to indicate what parts of the project you work on. So a lot of the mock-ups and stuff that I've included is more contextual to the stuff that I actually touched. But along the way, I also provided some context and stuff to make sure that, if it was a collaborative process, I made sure that the other people had credit for that as well. So this first page was showing the before of their brand standards, just to give a little bit of sort of context for what it was and where we took it. So the brand felt immature. It was, done on a low budget, and they were ready to move forward into a more global institution. So it was just kind of pulling some of the pages from the brand standards that were showing some of the elements that could use some work. And then in the following pages, essentially, I addressed how we solved those problems and what my contributions were. So this was the strategy plan, the report that they actually came to us with us first. So this was a bit of a presentation for the brand. So one of the things we did, or we decided as a team, was to sort of bring in this serif typeface to sort of elevate their use of Gotham, because they were using like all caps bold Gotham everywhere, and it was really getting sort of like, too college roo kind of spirit, and we wanted to sort of take it back a notch and maybe refine that a little bit more. So we introduced a lot more white into their color palette. We removed a lot of the kind of extensive greens and yellows and secondary color palettes that they had, and essentially just presented a more refined sort of look and feel. So once they agreed that they love the direction we were taking the brand, they decided to sort of sign a contract with us to develop their brand standards. And this was about a 1.5 year long project, back and forth, of us sort of doing a round one, presenting maybe about a third of an updated brand book. Within that brand standards, we introduced a refined color palette with tints. We did a bunch of work on accessibility. So we color matched all the colors and made sure that we were presenting some rules and guidance on how best to use the colors. We created a new grid system. We created gradient maps and illustrations design system, an updated type scale so that they could have more uniform and consistent marketing across a variety of materials. And then we basically mocked up all of that into a bunch of different materials that their marketing team could essentially use as a guiding point. So a few kind of like high level things that we did introduce was a bunch of logo lockups, because they didn't really have any rules around that. So how does it look when we want to showcase different campuses? How does it look when we want to showcase different facilities within each campus? Things like that. So essentially we came up with a bunch of different lockups for their icons, their word marks. And then on top of that, because the serif that we picked had a slightly different X height and kind of didn't sit on the same baseline, we had to essentially create some rules so that when their team was using it, they could adjust the font sizes accordingly so that the weights and proportions and everything were correct all the time. And then from there, we created this kind of like type scale that was universally applicable. So we didn't really restrict it to like specific font sizes, but instead created like a mathematical system so that no matter what size of typography you're using, the proportions would always be the same. So it's not really that far off any other type scale that you would see, but in this instance, we sort of proposed the idea that if you're designing for a billboard, the proportions might seem off if you're kind of using different font sizes in proportion to the size of the print. So essentially, we just created a little bit of some rigidity there. On top of that, we refined their color palette and made sure it was going to be AAA accessibility, because educational institutions in Canada are held to pretty strict standards. On top of that, we created some proportional sort of guidelines for their colors so that around the campus, people weren't using, the really bright green a lot. So that sort of refined and elegant and minimalistic sort of look would carry through the brand. So again, I'm really just showcasing some really important and impactful aspects of the project that we worked on. So again, just shedding light on, this was a team project, and I did execute a lot of this work, but a lot of it was also just me art directing with my partner, and depending who had the time during the project, we would basically just jump in and kind of execute what we needed to. So pretty much most of the images here I did touch at some point, but it was a collaborative effort. So another thing was Algonquin had this swoosh that represented a lot of their sort of core values, and because they are an institution that's very conscious of their Aboriginal sort of roots, they had this sort of like this marriage to this visual, but we knew it was kind of a tricky thing to implement because of the transparencies and the amount of colors and stuff. So we sort of fought to refine it to this really sort of minimalistic approach to the same sort of application. And basically, we sort of landed on the idea that we could have an extended swoosh that we could break up into sort of like various pieces and bits. So as you can see here on some of the banners, that swoosh could carry through across, you know, multiple print materials or multiple images on a web page or something like that. And it kind of like it made it more versatile. It made it more intentional, and it also made it a lot more you know, effective and just easier to use because there was no transparencies. You could basically use it as a footer. You could use it as a designed element, and then you could also use it on multiple different designs with the same sort of I guess cohesion. So it was really hard. We kind of had to fight for this. And what we did was we kind of just mocked up a bunch of different concepts and said, this is how it should look. And these are the reasons why it's going to be effective. It's going to cost less money to print because less colors. It's never going to create ugly colors because of transparencies and stuff like that. And then we ended up winning, and they decided to go with our direction on the swoosh. So. And as you can see here, we started designing grids for everything. So if you're going to do a mural on the wall, what would the grid look like for typography? It probably should share some characteristics of some of the print layouts and things like that. So we really went in depth with kind of refining this, and we made a lot of different refinements and additions and adjustments and stuff over a 1.5 year period working with their brand manager. And then rollout, of course. So a lot of their marketing was handled in-house, but then there were certain instances where they just wanted to elevate their materials. So we designed a bunch of new stationery for the institution. We gave them some campus illustrations as well as some other internal illustrations, illustrations to sort of focus on their tenets. We designed their certificates. We designed some of their internal reports and documents to shed light on the successes. We designed their email system and everything. So, so as you can see, all of the illustrations, I was the main illustrator on the team, so I did a lot of this work. My partner also illustrated some of the stuff within some of the people plan and the reports. But then working together, we essentially took the system that we created and applied it across a variety of materials. Oh, and that's it. So that was pretty much all I showed. And again, just like I was giving context today, I was basically just kind of explaining the project along the way and making sure they understood what my contributions were, what the thinking was behind the project, and how we solved certain problems.
Awesome. Oh, start my video. Thank you so much, Jared. That was amazing. I love a good brand guidelines. There's something to be said of something how simplistic it can be, but how complicated it is. All in the same thing. Like it's complicated to make it look simple. And there's some kind of elegance in that. And I always appreciate that. So I have some questions for you just really quick off the top because that's who I am. Was this your case study that in your presentation, was this the one that you went like did your deep dive in and you spent a little bit more time on?
Yeah, it was the one that I was a little bit more extensive on, just because again, I think it was a lot of the projects I showed, either the companies aren't operating anymore, and I was just proud of the work, so I wanted to show. So this was the one that I think was like the most extensive, had the deepest thinking and like kind of like the deepest process involved. So it kind of I guess was a good project to show how complex I can get with my thinking in a brand, even though the result might be fairly simple. Some of the other projects I showed maybe had more illustration and were maybe like more visually exciting, but either the company wasn't operating anymore and like it wasn't that complex of a problem to solve. It's like, so I thought that was a more interesting one to dive deeper in. But
No,
yeah.
and that's a really good point there too. Like I think there's some people in here like we've done themed versions of Freshly Certified before where we had it all color, we had it all branding, all packaging. I think it's important that what Jared just said there is it doesn't necessarily always have to be the same type of project. If you have a branding project or if you have you have a branding project or you have a logo project, you have a packaging project, you have a career like mine, you've got like a little bit of everything and you're kind of proud of a whole bunch of different things. And I know, Jared, you've got the same kind of portfolio as like there's a little bit of everything in there, so you can kind of mix and match it. Was the story that you did here made it easier to present, like put it together?
Sorry.
Like the story that you've kind of put, the story that you created in your case study, did it make it easier to present it? So you started from like where it was versus, you know, where they were to why we did something and then how it was received kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. I think like there's, there's the traditional sort of like challenge, solution, result case study that a lot of people in marketing sort of adopt. And I think like I don't necessarily like writing my case studies that way because it feels templated and stuff, but I think following a format of like here's the problem, here's how I solved it, and here's how those solutions worked is a really good way
Perfect.
to set up your presentations, because that way you just have guiding points to be like, I know what I'm talking about now, I know what I'm talking about now, and here's how it worked.
Yes, like you always need to let them know what you're talking about. Excellent. Thank you so much. We'll go on to our next one. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Jared. We'll go to Juan now. I don't know. I will introduce Juan as our Abdul in the background here. Is changing people over. So Juan is an associate director at Steer with over 20 years experience in wayfinding, environmental, and informational design. He started his career as a graphic designer and a university lecturer at Santiago de Chile. Wow, you're gonna really test me with my Spanish, I think. And relocated to London, UK, in the UK, not my London, the other London, to Steer in 2007. One has led development of information services, wayfinding, and strategies and design systems standards for pedestrian, cycle, and transit systems across Europe, Latin America, North America, and the Middle East, as well as wayfinding programs for cultural, educational, and healthcare. He currently leads the design for movement team from North America, operating from Toronto. The team is known for the Toronto TO 360 wayfinding strategy and its applications to park and trails wayfinding, the Toronto Path, Bike Share, TTC, and Metrolinx informational systems. All of this, which I'm sure that a lot of designers have come to love. Our recent commissions include work in the National Gallery of Canada, Town of Huntsville, and Ottawa pedestrian wayfinding. Juan, welcome.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Lovely. Well, thank you for having me. Some of you may be a bit puzzled about my presence in this forum, but I am indeed freshly certified. And it was a very interesting process to have after graduating in 1998, when perhaps some of you weren't even born. So I've been a designer all my life. I married a designer. I've been spending time with designers for over 25 years. And the process of certification began to me as a way of kind of presenting my credentials and becoming part of the design community in Canada. I've been working in and out from Canada since for the last 10 years, but only recently moved over to Toronto in 2022 with the family. And it meant that looking at the certification felt the right thing to do in terms of becoming part of the design community in the country. And it immediately makes you really nervous, right? Every time you're sitting in this kind of situation, you feel examined. And I know Jared suggested that you don't get nervous. That I do get very nervous. I'm nervous right away now, although I'm a great improviser. So I can just talk for hours about design and particular designs I'm involved in. The other point is that the conversation that happened during the portfolio is among peers. So despite of the levels of seniority, experience, or whether you are on your careers, you're having conversations with peers that they speak the language, they understand what are the complexities of the projects, and becomes a really, in my case, was a really friendly experience where I left very motivated about the practice and about becoming certified, which I did. And the other point that I think is important is that because I've been with the same company for over 16 years, I found difficult to detach my work from the company's work. And when you become senior, you're more often than not talking on behalf of a company. So you're not always talking on behalf of yourself. You're talking on behalf of a team, and also, well, you have contract responsibilities with clients. So the corporation, the company, and the person start to blend to the point that I decided to use my company's standard template to the presentation, because it's been years since the last time I did a presentation about me. I always been doing presentations about the company and my colleagues there. So I thought long and hard about what examples to present, because my projects are often long, often complicated, and as it's probably true for many of you, I cannot really claim that these are my projects, like my sole projects. So they're not things I do in the evenings. This is my day job, and sometimes goes for years, and there will be multiple people that are part of it. So I tried just to establish a narrative that can tell that story, that complexity. So off we go. So the case study I choose, and I'm double nervous because I just learned that Jared is from Ottawa, so now I'm double nervous. It's actually about Ottawa National Capital Wayfinding, which is a place I didn't visit until March 2020. And in March 2020, actually, this was the very last trip I made before lockdown. So I believe that projects are stories, and this is a project that was absolutely framed by COVID. It's we managed to have one visit and one round of stakeholder engagement prior to COVID. By the time I flew back to London from Pearson, Pearson was deserted, the airport was deserted, and London was in lockdown. So, and everything happened remotely, and it was extraordinary, because I guess it got the project at a very special drive, even to the point that we can culminate in implementation of one single wayfinding sign by the end of the year, COVID and everything. So it's quite a remarkable story. The output, it's a design report. I often get involved way earlier in the process. So another thing that what happened with this very long, complex projects is that you sometimes are inheriting work done by other people. So in this case, our scope was for the third phase of the project, with the first phase being delivered by a company called Entro, and the second phase more into the detailed design with a company called Into, that I believe is based in Ottawa. Our team is based half in Toronto, half in London, England. So of course, to do any of this work, we need to familiarize ourselves with the sensitivities and the significance of the capital city, of course. And I guess the theme that ran through the scope, well, so if I were to define the scope was, it was already established that there was a need for wayfinding, for pedestrian wayfinding in particular. It is known that most of the places of national significance are located at walking distance. It's just difficult to connect them and understand how one relates to each other. And there is ample international experience and national experience on pedestrian wayfinding system that made Tourism Ottawa believe that there was a case for wayfinding. So the case for wayfinding was already there. We just came here to design it in such a way that can be long-lasting, and it could do justice to the city. So our running theme was the theme of town and crown, right? It's for anyone that have worked in Ottawa, you understand there are multiple powers, federal, municipal, 2 different provinces across the river, and there are so many elements that are vernacular, and they're very, very Ottawa, at least in the sense of Ottawa, the civic capital, as opposed to the living city. So the idea of the tension of the town and crown, the idea of getting inspirations from the architecture, from what you can see when you walk around, it was a running thing. I'm not a product designer. I'm a graphic designer. However, my role in this project is to put things together and direct the whole team around a cohesive vision and a cohesive narrative. So the science family is extremely simple. It's just made of 3 products, the monolith, the mini-lith, and the finger post. The monoliths are illuminated units that are, I will describe in a minute. The mini-liths are smaller, slightly narrower versions that are placed along pathways. They don't exist yet. And finger posts, of course, are these traditional orientation posts that are very useful when you have cities that are not in a grid, which is the case of many instances in Ottawa. So it's a very simple system, and we were designing a pilot of around 27 signs that will be the initial phase. I mean, usual selection of elements. When the selection of typeface occurred, of course, we look at accessibility, we look at contrast, we look at range, and understand that the fonts, they need to be used in a consistent way depending on the information they're conveying. But we also look at copyright issues, right? We're conscious that not all sign manufacturers, all municipalities have access to expensive font licensing. And so we were looking into options within the realm of open source. When it comes to use of colors, we seek for inspirations in the city itself and in the national symbols without wanting to be too commonplace, without wanting these to become an enormous red maple leaf, but something that it was perhaps a bit more nuanced. And also very deliberate in the use of these colors. So a very muted palette with a tulip red that we branded as a highlight color to create contrast and a significance at distance. And of course, everybody's favorite piece of work in design wayfinding project, which is the representation of buildings that are important by themselves, but also act as landmarks, and they do really represent how the different attractions and places of significance are shape the city. So these are part of a very important tool of assets we use through the products. And the guidelines are not particularly extensive. The guidelines are much more about the functionality, are much more about how do you select destination, what goes first, how do you measure distance, what order should it follow, how the icons, the arrows and the messages it locks up, how do we deal with the bilingual systems in equal measures. So to comply with the Act, they cannot be one that is more prominent than the other, so they have to be identical. So we navigated all those issues, and we also did a project of reshaping a pilot area by doing connectivity analysis and identifying the main routes and selected a group of, did I say 27, maybe 34 units that will be installed. So far, 7 or 8 that have been installed. But the very first one was this, that was installed in December of the COVID year, or the first COVID year, 2020, against all the odds, as part of a revitalization project in William Street, that is a pedestrian connection between the shopping center and Rideau Center and Byward Market. The units were fabricated by a company called Night Signs that have offices in DC, and they have an operation in Ontario as well. They're made of anodized aluminum on the sides. So you see this striation on the side is in reference to some of the neo-Gothic architecture. They're illuminated. They have a big glass panel with a map and graphics stuck behind. And at the bottom, they do have these plinths of sorts that is made of reinforced concrete, glass fiber reinforced concrete. That was a process of trial and error to create something that resembled in some way the limestone that is so traditional to some of the government buildings. We want the system to be very clear in terms of its visual and physical identity. So a lot of care was put into the consistency in the use of icons, the consistency in the use of fonts, a muted color palette, and the cartographic development that is representative of the whole visual appeal of the system. This is another view of the sign. The output is not only physical product, but also it now is available as a visitor map. So, you know, when you go check into a hotel, the person in reception will come grab a pen and circle something and show you where you are and give you a sense of where the attractions are. So it also support the image and the presentation of the city in a way that is consistent both in the public realm and on paper, with some plans to turn it into a digital, but it's not a project that we are delivering. I guess that is kind of the narrative that I presented. I did present fewer images. It was mostly photos of finished products as opposed to sketches and the whole process. Although I really think that depends from project to project. I think there are projects where if I were part of the panel, I would love to see a bit of development. I would love to see a bit, how do you get there? What else did you try? In this case, we were a bit further down the process. So it was more of a process of precipitating all the inputs into a clear set of guidelines. But if you're presenting projects where I guess in many projects, the process is a lot more helpful to present. Not the case of this project, but I will encourage you to think about doing that. That's it. Thank you very much.
I like that. Juan, I think that was a really, really great way to end that. I think that it's important to say, it's like sometimes when you're doing a case study, like in the RGD, the reviewer's perspective, they love to see that pre-work. They love to see that, like, how did you get there? May not be for every project. You may not have time because you are limited to a 30-minute window for this presentation. But sometimes it's like, that's the best way of illustrating your point. And in this case, it's like, is it telling the story on how the presentation has been put together, or is it, you know, it's like some of the preamble? I like that point. That's a great takeaway for anybody here that's looking for doing presentations for RGD or in general. I think there's some really great takeaways for this as well too. Did you have that presentation kind of in the bag for something that you do for the company, or did you craft that one specifically for your presentation here?
No, I did craft. I'm a designer, of course. I did it from scratch. I just took the template and I built a beautiful file that I just updated for today with all the case studies formatted consistently. This wasn't my long one. This wasn't my deep dive. This was I presented a much shorter version of this on the day.
Oh, okay. That's also a good takeaway. I was going to ask that question next. So that's fantastic. Okay, so keeping us moving. So Juan, I'm going to get you guys back on camera at the very end. Okay. For anybody who's interested to learn a little bit more about Juan's work as well too, the written versions of all of our presentation, like the presentations today, I know that Juan and Maria, they have their written case studies actually on our website. So I'll post that in the chat here in a second. So if you ever want to go in and learn more about like what was actually the written component of submitted with Juan's work, for example, on one of his case studies, they are available on the website as well too. Because if you're like me, sometimes, you know, words don't come as easy. So it's just like, sometimes if you look at, see what someone else has done, you can kind of use that as kind of a good starting point. Okay, so next we have Maria, last but not least, absolutely. Maria, wow. Maria Sinestera. Maria is the co-founder of Tardigrada Studios, a design studio, a branding and interior design studio based in Vancouver, a Savannah College graduate of art and design, SCAD, alumni, and a registered graphic designer, RGD, who brings over a decade of graphic design expertise, mentorship, and global work experience. Her passion includes photography and typography. And if you're from Ottawa too, that's just going to make this really hilarious, but I don't think you are.
No, no.
Excellent, Maria, the floor.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Amanda. And I would like to say before I start that these two gentlemen have set the bar so high that is intimidating. And that's the beauty of RGD, actually, that you get to sit and talk with designers that you respect for the work they do. So I became an RGD certificate 3 years back. I've been collecting my stickers and I love to be part of it. It was quite an immediate crush when I discovered RGD on Instagram and I saw the resources and the people. I just got the vibe and I applied immediately. I would like to say that for my portfolio review presentation, I was very nervous. And, you know, just seeing the faces of the committee and talking to them at that very beginning, that transformed my all of those nervousness into confidence. So whoever is planning to start the process of certification, I would really encourage it. If you're scared about it, just do it. They're great people, and they will be doing questions that you will know how to answer because you have done the work. So don't worry about it. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you one case study. Hold on. Let me see once you are able to see my screen. Are you seeing my screen there?
Yeah, we got
Yeah,
you.
we can see it.
Perfect. So this case study was not the one that I actually presented during my portfolio review, but I chose it today because it's a project that really makes me happy. And it was a project that has an extensive scope of work. And so also I get to the chance to design a board game, which I never did before. So I just wanted to show you this today. The project name is Be Active Every Day, and this is a health campaign focused for kids, and it's an initiative by Doctors of BC. My role in the project was to be the art director and graphic designer. But I would like to point out that I was not alone. I had 3 amazing, talented designers working with me. We worked with interior designer, we worked with 3D artist, and with an illustrator as well. And the scope of work, as I mentioned, it was extensive, but I'm going to be showing you today the logo redesign, game design, and the website. The project was completed in 2020. And so there were 2 main goals for this project. The first one was to give a refresh to the Be Active Everyday logo to align to the Doctors of BC brand. It had some problems of legibility and it was looking outdated as well. And the second goal of the project was to develop the collateral material for the campaign, which, as I mentioned, was to help kids build healthy habits through play and adventure. So as many, and I would say most of the projects I approach, my first step is to select good typography that conveys the message that I want to convey. So in this case, it was the Mikado typeface, with rounded edges, which was very playful, but it didn't compromise the legibility. We had the color palette, and we created a grid for the faces of the kids. This is the before and the after. The idea was to keep the same message of diversity, of playfulness and fun, Similar structure, but as you can see, it was a more modern look and a cleaner look, more aligned to the Doctors of BC brand. So the second part of the project had to do with the campaign, and the campaign was about a challenge. The challenge was to get at least 60 minutes of activity every day for the month of October. So what happened here was the doctors were visiting the schools, and they would provide kids with a guide, the Be Active Everyday Guide, and a board game. This is how we translated the faces of the logo into characters with more personality. And this is the guide I was talking about. So the guide was a C card. It was a pocket-sized guide in which the kids were able to track their daily activities in the challenge chart that you can see in the middle. So they 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they would place some stickers in there, and they would have some space to write what their daily activity was. In the other side, they would have the game rules in the lower part of it. And in the top part, we also develop some illustrations of, ideas of how to have fun outdoors. This project was developed during COVID, so it was very important to communicate the measurements that we're going through the moment. This is the very first sketch that when we were doing all the process of ideation, and I really treasured this one. I just wanted to drop it here and show it. Next step was to translate these illustrations into 3D. So this is where our amazing 3D artists came and helped us with it. You can see them now painted. In this part of the process, the client was very involved. So the client was actually the one who painted them. And so this is again a sketch of how everything started for the board game. The mechanics of the game were based on the game of the goose, which is a spiral game, race game that you start in home and then you go through 1, 2, 3 steps. You have different challenges in between, and then you reach to the center. So as you can see, there are some illustrations of some of the challenges. So stuck in a canoe or the farm. So each of them would have an action that would be written in the guide that I showed previously. This is the final product. So the idea, as I said, was to start at home and to explore British Columbia. So you start at home, go through the cities, then you pass through the beaches, go to the greenery, forests, and you end up in the top of the mountain. So you can see there are 2 dices, and the reason for this is we had 2 versions of the game. When I mentioned at the beginning that the doctor would visit the schools and provide the kids with the guide and the board game, he would provide a standardized version of the game, which was made on paper. So you can see the dice made on paper. And then for the kids that were able to complete the challenge and would win the challenge, they will be given the solid version, the premium version. So they would get the box. This is the paper version. So this was given to all the kids, irrespective of doing or not winning or not winning. So this was an interesting approach to develop the characters as well. Intersecting the cardboard, and then, as you can see in the sketch, just showing every side of every face of the character, so front, back, and 2 sides. Then we later translated this into the digital space. We developed the website in which schools and doctors could sign up for the challenge. And the results were very successful. The campaign was very engaging. The number of children participating in Be Active Every Day reached a record high this year. There were very positive comments, and well, after that, they decided to continue utilizing this material year by year. And that's about it. That will be all. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Maria. I think that was a really good illustration of between the three of you that three different ways of really showing a different way of presenting your work. So in your case, it's like, first of all, this is a really great panel of like the diversity of the amount of different kind of design that a lot of the illustrators see and such, between highly technical wayfinding to a really in-depth brand design or to a child's board game. Like, it's still amazingly effective graphic design, and the fact that you presented it in three different ways is also to show that, you know, you're able to talk through it. You built it in a way that you layered your story along, but you could set it in a certain way, or you can just really show it the way you needed to show it in large images. And I think that I've done very similar thing in my past as well too. So thank you for that. Like, I think that was really great to show that as well too. You know what I'm going to do is, like, we're limited for time, so I'm not going to go into too pointed. I loved the idea that you really started off this conversation with, you know, the other designers are there because, you know, like we're easy to get along with. You're talking to designers, like you're talking to other people that are in the same situation as you as well too. These are volunteers, etc. as well too. I think that's a really powerful point. So I'm gonna before I share my screen, I've got some just information, some housekeeping, and some information on you guys to share with everybody. There was a couple of questions that came through. So if you've only worked in-house for one organization, so we've got, I think, Jared, you've had this as well too, and I know Juan, you've had this as well, is if you only worked in-house for one organization and you want to show more variation, are mock-ups and personal projects acceptable? So I'm going to say yes to that, but I would love to hear from you guys. Like, for those who may not have any personal passion or projects, how do you diversify your work coming from an in-house design? Juan, did you want to go first on?
Yes. I think that personal projects are personal projects. They do have an element that is perhaps it may make things complicated because of depending on what the brief is. So as a designer, I think it's absolutely important to give an answer to the brief, right? And for the brief to be self-imposed, it perhaps is valid, right? But I believe that personal exploration, personal work may only have a limited space if you're selecting 4 or 5 projects to talk about. Particularly if you look at the write-up, you will be asked to describe what is the brief, what was the process. So I believe that examples like Maria's of Jared, where you have a beginning to end story, are more appropriate, and well, design is nothing other than responding to other people's briefs. So I'm a bit orthodox on this point, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I think what more my point was, and you're right, and just regarding the specific criteria, if you want more information on this, visit Heidi's webinar on Monday. It's fantastically detailed and she answers all your questions. You can have no more than one personal self-published design in your group, but you can have other, you know, freelance designs. I know, Jared, I think you want to talk about this. I think more of it is like, if you work as an in-house designer, kind of like I do currently right now, is how do you diversify if you don't have a diversification of work to pull from? Jared, did you have any input on that one?
Yeah, so I mean, like I've been a leader in-house as well as like I've been a teacher at a school where I saw a lot of student projects and portfolios and stuff like that as well. And like my main advice that I always give to students and about like personal works or even like student projects, because like when you graduate from a university, if you apply to all the agencies in your city, you have to assume that maybe like 50% of your class are maybe presenting the exact same project. So like you really got to set your bar higher than your peers essentially to impress them with a student project. So I always try and say like it's okay to include personal work so long as you're showing design thinking in a personal project. So when I was teaching, I would get a lot of students. They'd come to me with their iPads and they'd be like, "Oh, I love TrueGet texture supply," and they would like show me all these retro illustrations with no application or usage or anything like that. And I'm like, "Don't put this in your portfolio because unless you're going to be like a rock star illustrator, you're not going to be getting $10,000 illustration projects right out of the gate." So the way that I always tell people to diversify their portfolio is to consider that every piece you're showing has to show some design thinking. So if you work in house, I would always explore an idea that I thought nobody would pick, but it was like the one that I wanted. That's real professional work. So if you do have extra time at work, explore multiple ideas on certain projects. And if you're not satisfied with the result of a project, you can always throw in professional work that didn't actually get picked, but you can include it and kind of give a little bit of an idea of like why you think it's a successful design. And so long as it meets the requirements and your brief makes sense, then I think it's okay to include that. But again, always look at the requirements, because if you have 3 personal projects and they told you only to include one, then you've already sort of, like following instructions is kind of part of design. So make sure you're considering all factors when you're doing it and just be intentional about the work that you show. So don't show about a bunch of illustrations just because you want to be an illustrator. If you have illustrations and you want to like show your design thinking, put it on a beer can, make a website mock-up, make a brand project out of it, create your own brief and your own outcomes and results that you need to achieve. And then from there, you can essentially show a personal project that has some like real world application behind it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. We have some massive Jared love today, just so you know. There was someone in the comments that was asking if you were taking a mentee through the RGD. So we'll have to follow up. I just actually shared the connection. I'm sure that any one of these designers would love to be mentors. I'm volunteering them. Just notice that.
I was
But
previously a mentor, and it's maybe something I'll consider in the future. So good to know.
okay. It's fun. I'm doing it right now. It's excellent. It's good. So I thought that was really funny. That very first question we had came through is, and maybe we can answer this one really quick, is how can a job seeker craft a compelling case study, and what elements should be included to ensure that it resonates effectively with recruiters specifically? Maria? I don't know.
Sure. I would like to say like,
What element?
yeah, could you repeat it again for me?
Yeah. So how can a job seeker craft? So how can a designer craft a compelling case study, and what element, which we just talked about today, and what elements should be included to ensure that it resonates effectively with recruiters? So what do you think recruiters are looking for? What do you think job seekers are looking for? And as far as portfolio goes, I'm just kidding. This is not really related to so much as the certification part of this, but it's just a general question, which I'd love to give advice.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a very general one, but I would like to say, like first get informed about the place you're applying to, what exactly they're looking for, and then craft your portfolio or your application according to that. Show your strongest skills on it. So make sure to select your work that best showcases your skills. That's the short answer.
I'm gonna cut this short, guys. I'm really, really, really sorry for anybody who is here. Just because we are at a 3 o'clock mark. I've put on the screen here that you can see how to contact any one of these designers if you have any follow-up questions for them. Really quick, I'm going to do some housekeeping if I can move my screen here. On tomorrow there is some free programming from the RGD. Tomorrow there's a 2024 Great Canadian Studio Crawl. It's all afternoon. It goes from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's on YouTube. They're going to be going to different studios right across Canada. So check that out. Monday, the RGD certification webinar with Heidi. The sign up is right on the homepage of the rgd.ca website. Just scroll down to events and it's the #1 there. It's at 2:00 tomorrow. And Design Thinkers 2024. If you want the best of inspiration coming from RGD, I highly suggest that you either get a ticket for in person if you're out west, or if you want to travel out west, or if you want to stream it. I know until April 5th, the streaming ticket for both days is under $200, and it's Ellen Lupin and Jessica Heisch, which I have a design crush on for the last like 2 decades. And Tina Roth Eisenberg, who was Swiss Miss, or Creative Mornings, Snask is going to be there. Fantastic. Like, you will get your money's worth. So on that, I will leave everybody here because it is 2 minutes after 3, and I know that we've got a work to do. So I want to say thank you, Jared, Juan, Maria. You guys were amazing. And I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Jared and Juan.